Hello and hello everybody, my name is Lucy and welcome to Books and Brushes. So today a video I'm really excited for, and that is my best books of 2019. I'm really excited for this video because it is the best books I read this year, and I had such a great reading year with so many incredible books, and I can't wait to talk and gush and highlight the ones that stood out the most, that I think deserve the most recognition out of what I read, and books that I really want to shout from the rooftops about because they're so great. If you weren't around from last year, I had a top 3 favourite books and 5 honourable mentions. That's different this year. This year I have 7 favourite books and 7 honourable mentions. So that's a lot more books. When compiling this list, I just could not narrow it down from the 7 and the 7 honourable mentions. They were all deserving. Like I said, this year's reading year was just better than last year's. Not in terms of quantity, but in terms of quality. In quantity, I actually read less books. Last year I read about 53, and this year's more like 46. So less books, but the favourites are more. There is more better quality books that I read this year. So I'm not disappointed that I didn't, match or top last year's number, because I'd rather have loads of amazing books than more okay books. But anyway, enough of those stats and things. Let's get into my favourite books of the year. I can't wait to gush. Yes. So the first book I want to talk about was, I think, the very first book I read of the year, and that was Farmland Sentience by G. Lawrence. This book, in case you're around back then, most of you probably weren't. I read this book with my mum. She read this book and said I'd love it, and I read it, and then I shared a book that I read with her. It was real fun. But this book she gave me, oh my god, it was insane. Even at the beginning of the year, I struggled to describe it because I didn't want to spoil you from the get-go. You want to go into that book not knowing, because the discovery is equally amazing and horrific. This is a book that is horrible in its content and the issues it puts forth, and you read it and it makes your skin crawl, and it's horrible, the concept, and yet it's so brilliant in that. And the beginning of the book, it opens and you're not quite sure what's going on, and then when you figure it out, you're like, oh. And it was so abrasive and unlike anything I've ever read. The reason my mum recommended it to me was because it was like a dystopian, and my mum doesn't really read dystopian, and that's my favourite. So she said to me, like, Lucy, is this the kind of stuff you read? Like, is this what you read? Mother-daughter connection here, like. And I read it and I was like, no mum, I've never read a book like this. But it's amazing. The author of this book is not a dystopian writer. I think she's a historical fiction writer. And yet, wow, she managed to write this dystopian that's incredible and so unlike any dystopian I've ever read. It stands out so much in that genre, and if you want something new, if you're just like, dystopians are all the same, read this book because it's amazing. It's set more in a fantasy futuristic world. It's got magical elements tied in. It deals a lot with human rights and animal issues, and I don't really want to go any more into it. There's a lot of weird things that happen in this book. Like, you're reading a book and, oh, suddenly monster bug creature, okay. You kind of have to just roll with it, and it makes sense because it's in this bizarro world, so you're like, yeah, of course that could happen. It's a strong, bold read. You need to have a constituency of some kind to read that book. But if you do, and if you like that kind of thing, a book that challenges you, a book that makes you really think, whoa, from a new perspective, like, I never thought of it like that. If you love animals and human rights and dystopian themes like that, it's a great book. Honestly, it was amazing. I read it a whole year ago, but I still have this intense feeling and vibe about it. Who knew that this was going to be on my list? I certainly would not have predicted that, but it was amazing and it deserves some limelight because I don't think I know anyone other than my mum who has read this book. The second book I have to talk about I also read on Kindle instead of a physical version, which is annoying because I like physical versions if they're my favourites. It's always the way. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Yes, I know. Every booktuber has talked about this book and everyone loves it. I'm not special. I'm not different. It's a great book. So I kind of jumped on this hype train late. I didn't really expect to love it as much as everyone else did. I just thought I'd give it a try. Yep, turns out I'm trash for it. Whoops. So in case you haven't heard, you probably have, this book is set in like the 1960s era of Hollywood, following an actress called Evelyn Hugo. And it's written in like a biography way. There's an interviewer who's going to talk to an old-aged Evelyn Hugo about her life and reveal all the scandals and what really happened, and the behind the scenes of her quite dramatic life and her scandalous 7 husbands. Evelyn Hugo does not actually exist. She's not really a figure from the 60s Hollywood, but it feels like she is. Reading it, it's like she's a real person, and it's incredible how real and textured and flawed and just so good. Got that lovely bi and gay representation in this book, so all of you that I know love that kind of thing, that's in here, and I love how it was done. I just felt the book was so well written. I love how Evelyn's basically telling her story. I love how the things that the media think happened and what actually happened, 2 totally different things. There's some lines in this book that made me go, whoa. Just some really great, interesting ideas in this book. Evelyn Hugo as a human being is such an interesting character. She does some dubious things, but she's a good person, but like things go wrong. She's such a real person, and the way she uses her sexuality to get ahead, it was such an interesting perspective and way of looking at things. I found all the drama amazing, like I didn't find it too cheesy. Her and her relationships I just thought was so interesting, and the plot twist at the end floored me. Honestly, floored me. I was I remember when I read that plot twist. Me and my boyfriend were downtown and he was in Debenhams trying on some trousers. I said I'd go with him, help him pick them out. He was taking forever in the changing room, like forever. And I'm not good with shopping and waiting, and I don't like it. So I was like, I'll just cheekily read my Kindle book, Advantages of Kindle Anyone. So I just thought I'd read just a chapter of Evelyn Hugo. And that's when I hit the twist. And my boyfriend comes out the changing room and I'm going, and he's like, what, don't you like the trousers? And then I had to put my phone away and pretend my world hadn't imploded by this news. And I couldn't explain or describe why my emotions went from 0 to 100 in the space of the work when he was in the changing room, and that's a moment I'm going to remember forever. Not just the twist, but where I was when it happened. Thought the book was done so beautifully and written so well, and I just loved it, and the hype is understandable. I get it, you're not supposed to like hyped books, you want to be different and special, but I'm not. I liked the book, and that it's in the top of the year because I thought it was brilliant. It's funny because both of those books I think are adult books, so there you go. So the third book I want to talk about as one of my favourite books of the year is Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia. The first physical book in this list. I read this during the summer at some point. I'm pretty sure I read it this was one of the ones I read in a day? Yeah, it was. I spent a whole day in my house and I devoured this book. I read the whole thing, and it's not a small book. Not small, and I somehow read it all. Don't know how that happened. This book hit me in so many ways and in so many personal pressure points. So it's got the art, you know, I'm an artist, I love art. So main character's an artist, and I love her struggles and completion and passion for art and all the goods and bads that come from being an artist. Mental health stuff, always nice to see repped and done so well. There were so many heartbreaking moments in this story. I loved the relationship. I thought it built brilliantly, and I loved the two characters. I remember loving the love interest. Can't remember exactly everything that happens in this book because it happened back in the summer and I read it in a day, but I remember loving it, and the ending was so emotional, and so many points of this book were emotional, and I understood this character. I understood her, and when you feel that for a main character, when you feel like you could easily be them, that's something really cool. And I don't have much more to say about this because I can't remember. It was back in the summer. I read it in a single day. Maybe I need to reread this book. I know it was one of my favourites of the year, but I can't remember the whole thing, and maybe I should reread it next year. That would be fun. I've forgotten so much, and I know I love it, so I can go into a book knowing I'm going to enjoy it. And yeah, it was a great story about art, and about fame, and about relationships, and about mental health, and about isolation, and how you feel and express yourself, and so many things. Now, my next book on my list, my fourth book, is, again, read it in a day. Me and one of my best friends, it was her birthday, and she wanted to go to Southampton and have a meal, so I read it like all on the train and everything, up there on the train back, and then all evening, and I finished it in a day. Again, how do I keep doing that? That never happens. And this one broke my very soul. And that is All the Things We Never Said by Yasmin Rahman. This book completely blew me away. I don't know if I can describe how much I love this book. If you go back to when I read it in August, I ranted and raved about it then, because this book is needed in this world. It is so important, and it's important to me, and I want everyone to read this. This book is about three girls who go online and find a website that connects you with other people who want to commit suicide. It connects you with these people to make a suicide pact so that you can have the courage to do it together. As you can imagine, there are warnings, trigger warnings here. We have characters who are very depressed and who suffer from multiple different aspects and for multiple different reasons, and all three of these girls have very different stories. They all come together and just as strangers, and they end up growing this beautiful friendship, these three, because they understand each other in a way that other people just don't, and they connect, and they're so different. These three girls are so different, and yet this thing connects them, and they're such great friends together. They just fit so perfectly. It kind of reminds me of me and my two best friends, because we're all so wildly different too, and yet we just seem to fit. And these three girls have to go on this journey, and they discover maybe they don't want to commit suicide, but the website that connected them isn't going to let it go, and it causes a lot of trouble. Oh my god, like even just thinking about this book, I'm getting choked up because it was so key and important. Obviously the main characters are depressed. The one main character I'd say in particular, damn, do I relate? The way these characters think and feel and act, and it explains and describes it in such a human way. These girls aren't dramatic. These girls aren't just trying to get attention. These girls are suffering from something really major, and they don't need to be persecuted for it. They need to be understood and accepted and welcomed, and they need the friendship that they gained to help them through it. And it's hard and it's horrible, and I cried like a baby. At the end, there's this one part, the black moment in the book, the dark moment where it all goes wrong, and oh, I cried so much. At the end of this book, I was just a weeping mess of a human being. I've just related to this book in so many ways, and it's so beautiful, and I can't think of a book that better describes depression or explains it, like shows it from a real human's perspective. It's not just this you know, suffering artist thing. This is a real problem that some people face, and this is how it is in life. This is how it works. It's the truth of it. It's honest, and I love that about this book. So emotional. The story is so vexing. The characters are so interesting. Another thing I really loved about this book was the way it was written and the layout. So you get the perspectives from the three girls in turn, and each girl has a different format for the way it's written. So the main character, or what I think is the one main character, the main girl, she has her story and then she's got like inner thoughts and it's written in this different text. And I love the way that was used to show like that voice in her head, that horrible thing that talks to her and convinces her of things. And it's written even in this menacing font. I thought it was so beautiful because it seemed so realistic to me. I loved the way that was done. Kara was the one character who's just, it was plain text. This page here, it was just that story, her talking about it. She is got disabled, so there's disabled rep and stuff in here. It's not perfect because Kara's quite flawed as a character, but I think that's kind of the point, that these characters are real and more than anything going through a crap ton of shit. Yeah, so she was the one that had the plain normal text. And lastly you have Olivia. Olivia is the third girl in the book, and all sorts of tragedy going on there. All the girls have tragedy in very, very different ways, which I like, that they're representing different sides, how there's reasons, how there's not reasons, how all sorts of things contribute to these girls and how they feel. But Olivia's writing is the most unique in format, and it's because it's written almost like physically and visually. So can you see that it's not just like a page of text, all the text is relating to what she's saying. So sometimes she'll be like the water sprinkled and like the words are sprinkled across the page. I can't even really describe the format, but it's so cleverly done. It takes a second for your brain to adjust to it, but when it does, like, your brain just flows through this text, and it's her quirky mind, it's her way of looking at things that she manages to see the world. And I find that a really, really interesting format. I like that all these three girls have different formats to their text. Not only because, it helps separate them from each other, but because it's just so interesting to read, and everyone's different, people are different, so it's nice to see it visually represented, that these are three different brains. Not that she needed it. The author who wrote this book, all these characters are so uniquely themselves. Even if it was all written in just plain text, would have no problem distinguishing one character to another. Like, she doesn't do that to kind of help boost her as a handicap thing. She does it because it's interesting. She doesn't need to separate these characters and their voices because their voices are so strong, but she does it anyway. I absolutely loved this book, and I loved what it said, and I loved the hope and the despair in it. It's got everything. I feel so strongly towards this book, and I just think that people should read it. Whether they are depressed and they feel like they need someone to relate to, or they need that ray of hope, or they need something honest, feel like they're not alone, or someone who doesn't really understand depression, who can't possibly, and by reading this book may see a glimmer of what it might be like to be in that frame of mind. I find that so important because I think people should try and understand other people's perspectives. I mean, that's why we read, right? To understand from other people's points of views and to feel differently and to understand each other. To me, that's what a book does. A good book will show you a whole new perspective, a whole new point of view, and make you more an understanding person. So this book does show you, and I don't know what it's like from a person who doesn't understand because I'm not in that boat, but I imagine it would be really grounding to see this and be like, because it's not dramatic, it's very realistic, and I can tell you that it's very realistic, and to see what it is like inside the brain. Not totally, it's impossible to completely map out, but this book does a good job of it, and just please someone read it. This book means so much to me, and it will forever be in my heart. So the next book I also read in summer because I read a lot during the summer. So this is book number 5 of my favourite books. These are not in order, by the way, the 7 books. The next book is Children of Blood and Bone by Tony Adeyemi. This book was pretty high praise, not like super hyped like Evelyn Hugo was, but still very hyped up, very well loved. I knew it was a book I wanted to read. Just the description sounded great, and it was everything I could have wanted. This book set in like a fantasy land of Orisha, which is like a African inspired fantasy world where there are characters who have like elemental magics and other kind of magics, all sorts of magics, and there are different like tribes, types of magic, and magic has been stomped out and erased by a corrupt, tyrannic king. The main character is a potential magic person. I can't remember the word for it now, it was a long time ago and there was so much terminology. But there's like characters who would have had magic if it still existed. Since there is no magic, they don't have it. And she goes on this journey to restore magic and free her people and become unoppressed and fight and rise up against this terrible system. And it had everything from fantasy and dystopian, which I loved. The world was so rich and fleshed out and interesting and fun, and I loved the African inspired tint to it, and I loved the characters. I remember one of my favourite things about this book was the characters. I thought the main character was, well, a complete badass. I absolutely loved her. She was very pessimistic, very downtrodden, very strong, and I loved her. And I loved all, I can't remember any of their names. That's the problem. I read this book so long ago and it had such unusual names that I wouldn't know how to pronounce if I tried. So remembering their names is tricky. I do not remember all the names, but I remember the prince. I'm gonna call him the prince. He was really interesting character. The switch in his character arc was so interesting, and the way that he changed his mind, how his whole character evolved and changed and his allegiance changed, and I found that really interesting. A twist I wasn't expecting and I loved it. Very hate to love stuff if you like that trope. I thought it was such a different way to do it. Never quite seen it done like that before, from that extreme to extreme, but it makes sense. I'm gonna call her the princess. Again, don't know the name. She was a really interesting character. I think she was one of my favourites actually. She was such a supporting character. She was a great friend, a great person. She didn't need magic. She wasn't the spotlight, but there was something so beautiful about her and about what she was trying to do and why, and how it wasn't her problem, but she made it her problem because she felt it was wrong. And she was a character who came from everything. Like, I loved her brain and her story and her reasonings and what she did and the things that she did and the bravery that she must have had to do all those things. And I'm gonna call him the brother. A very interesting character. Such a worn, weathered, pessimistic, angry character in a lot of ways. But that sibling relation, I loved all the relationships. Not only did I love the characters as they were, but I loved the way they all interacted. I think that's what sold this book. It was the interactions between all of these interesting characters and the relationships that they had with each other. Good, bad, camaraderie of unusual characters that shouldn't go together and yet do. I felt all of them so strongly connected. And there was two sets of siblings and there was like a romance going on in there. Obviously not between the siblings. No incest stuff here, guys. But I loved like kind of resentments in the groups and loves in the groups and friendships in the groups. And there was, I loved the way they all crossed in that way. The story and the plot was so interesting and fast paced. The beginning shows you the world, but I don't think it was slow or info dumpy or anything. And I loved the way the story progressed and what happened, and there was so much that happened. So many other characters that came in and out. The king was a great baddie. I loved him as a villain. And the end, it's so brutal. The beginning was very discriminatory. The end was torturous. The characters, I mean. I remember reading it and just going, I don't want this to end. Like, it's a great book. It's amazing. I love the characters. I love the plot. I love everything that's happening. And so I need to get to the sequel in 2020 because this was fantastic and it kind of left it on a cliffhanger-ish. And I need the next one. I'll probably have to reread this before I read the next one to get it all back in my head. Blood and Bone, again, hyped up, but rightly so. And if you want a fantasy adventure that's about the characters and about rising up and about evil and magic, it was perfect. And I absolutely love this story. So the next book I have to talk about was a buddy read, and I didn't expect this at all. The book on this list is The Burning by Laura Bates. Now I read this pretty recently, so you might have been around to hear me talk about this book. It made the list. I picked this book up on a whim. and I never expected the contents within. So this book is about a girl who has had something very, very horrible and traumatic happened in her past. In the beginning of the book, I'd say in the first half maybe, is very mysterious about what that thing was, and they keep it concealed, but she's terrified of this past catching up with her. And it was written, it's hard not to talk about this book without giving away the spoilers, but to tell you why I loved it. So, spoiler time! Spoiler time, are you ready? Spoiler time. This book follows a main character who has been a victim of like revenge porn and sexual images of herself being spread across social media. These boys have gotten a hold of pictures of her and her life has turned to shit. It's horrible, like she's in a living hell from all what's happened, and not just bullied, it's gotten to a point of demonization and she can't go anywhere without being called a whore or all these horrible things, and it breaks her. So her and her mother have to move to a new town in Scotland and try and rebuild their life and try and pave over it and ignore it, just completely keep a mystery where they've come from and why they moved. But it does catch up with her and the whole thing happens again, and we as the reader see it happen. It makes friends, and friends inevitably tough to stick around in this situation, and there is so much horrid in this book. The way that she's persecuted, the way that everyone is against her. So all the kids have to hate her because they don't want to be the ones that don't hate her. She's demonized, she's bullied, she's called every name under the sun. People get so personal with her. There's kids that set up Facebook pages and their dad's point of view saying, oh, I'm so ashamed of my slut of a daughter, and horrid things that it makes you feel sick. This character was completely destroyed. She's crying and shriveling in her room and she can't go anywhere, she can't do anything. She's paralysed by this hatred, and you feel it. When you read these words, you feel it yourself. It's horrible to go through. It's a hard book to read. It's so important to show this happening. And then there's the teachers and the adults who blame her as well. Oh well, she just shouldn't have done it in the first place. She got herself into this. And that's not how it happened. And she's blamed, like, even by the teachers, like when all the shit hits the fan again. They don't blame or punish the boys who are doing it. They blame her, and like they try to kick her out of school, and so much injustice that happens, and you feel so bad for her and her mum, because of course her mum's had to go through all this, and that must be so hard as a mother. I'd love to hear perspective from a parent who read this book, because I think that would be another heartbreak in itself. Another element of this book is the historical magical realism. There's like this historical magical realism element, which I haven't even mentioned yet. She does this school project about the witch trials, and she manages to find a local story in this town of Scotland, and she gets so connected to this historical figure that has been lost to history, and her attempts to find this woman and know her story, and she comes into contact with a historian who helps her, and together they build this. She's discovered this, like this is a new figure who's been lost and burned from history, and the witch trials of this woman who was accused of being a witch and burnt at the stake. In this story is intersections of that woman's story from the past, so you get a historical woman's story at the same time as this modern character's. And the way that Laura Bates has directly compared these stories is incredible. This girl who was accused of being a witch and burnt at the stake, yeah, her and this modern character are somehow going through a very similar situation. It not being their fault, but due to sexual reasons, they're being discriminated and completely hated against and punished for something that isn't their fault. And yeah, the witch goes through it worse, you know, she gets tortured and burned, but both those characters are going through the same thing. And it's horrible. How in this modern world have we not progressed any further than the witch trials, where we burned innocent women for no reason? And in this day and age, we're just completely blaming girls for just having a body. There was so much feminism in this book without it being preachy, because it was a story, it was a real story of a real girl, and it showed what I'm imagining so many girls have gone through. This highlights, hello, this is happening. How are we not addressing this? How are we not fixing this? How has society gone so far off track or not changed at all since those horrible times? And it's a horrible, difficult book to read, but it's so brilliant because of it. Kind of like that first book I talked about. If you love a book that challenges you, that it feels nasty and it makes you feel horrible and it makes you think shit about society, but it's so good and so real and so important. I really want to promote this book because it does it in such a beautiful, humane way of showing this girl's story and how she overcomes or doesn't overcome, how she's completely oppressed by it. And it's a great story, but the message in it is so solid. And this book was horrible to read, it was hard, I felt sick, I felt persecuted, I felt shaky. And for a book to do that to you, to put you so in the shoes of the main character and say, you are this person, go through hell. It's horrid and hard, but it's brilliant and important and I love it. The Burning by Laura Bates. I know I've probably spoiled it for most of you because who really listens to spoiler warnings, hey? Read it because I cannot convey to you how strong it is. And the only way to know that is to read it and to find out what happens to her and the witch. It's a great story and it's in my favourites list. And the last of my favourites, wow, I've talked forever. This video is going to be so long. One of my favourite books, nay, series of the year. Scythe by Neil Shusterman. Yes! I finally read it. And if you watched my November wrap up, you know the emotional, you just know. So I don't want to talk to death about this book because I literally just reviewed it and wrapped it up and talked about it so in depth. But I also do want to talk about it because this is my favourite books of 2019 list. So I want to look back on this video from the future and know the feelings I had of this book. So I'll try and talk about it a bit, but not too much. We'll see how successful that gets. I've been waiting to read this book since it came out for a couple of years, I think, and I finally got to it and it was everything I could have imagined and hoped for because Neil Shusterman is a fucking god. This story is about a world where we basically cured death. There is no disease. We can revive people from the dead. Like, technology has advanced so far that we just don't die anymore and we're immortal. So to curb the population and keep the population to a reasonable level, they hire scythes, who are humans who go around killing people to fill a quota to keep the population at bay. And to be a scythe is a very rigorous thing. You have to become a scythe's apprentice and go through everything. You have to be honourable and kill with compassion, and scythes have their own council. They answer not to the law but to themselves. They are above the law. They have to follow the scythe rules and not the general law for humans. And if you're killed by a scythe, that's it, you're gone. No revival for you. This book follows two apprentices who get stuck in this political world of the scythedom and have to go through all sorts and things go very wrong. And it's about the scythedom and the world and how this utopia has very dark sides and a lot of treacherous things to overcome in this world. It's like Neil Shusterman always does, the world is perfect. The world building, this amazingly wild concept seems so at home, so real. The characters are just glorious. Rowan is my baby. I love Citra, I love Curie and the evil Goddard and Faraday. Oh, so many great characters, so many great morals and things to think about. Such an interesting world, and it's great to think, wow, if this was true, how did that think? How would that affect you and your human experience? If you know that you could just live forever. People are getting bored. The Thunderhead is so interesting, that technological overseer of humanity. This book was fantastic. There's action, there's morals, there's great characters, there's such an interesting plot and idea and concept. I could describe Unwind, my favourite book, in that exact same way. There was no way it was not going to reach the favourites list, and no one is surprised. Also, Thunderhead this year. I haven't read The Toll yet. That will probably be my first book of 2020 if I'm a betting woman. This one, oh, it took what happened inside. Stakes times 10, and that ending, oh my god. The ending was so massive and dramatic and incredible and it was mind-blowing, and this whole story was great. I loved the interjections from the Scythe journals and Thunderhead's monologues. All the switches of character, just like in Unwind, because he does this a lot. I know Neil Shusterman, he does this thing when towards the end of the plot the chapters get shorter, the perspective changes quicker, so it makes the plot feel faster. So it's like he's speeding it up, and it feels more, because you're like, this is happening, all the plots have connected and are all blowing up at the same time, and this is this perspective, it's all merged into one glorious massive plot finale, and it's so Neil Shusterman. As I said in my November wrap-up, I got to the end of this and I wept, not just for the story, but the fact that I got to read a Neil Shusterman book again, a great book written by him that felt so him. If you'd have given me this book and the author was a pen name, I'd have been like, wow, that sounds like Neil Shusterman. His writing is so distinctive to me. These two books will forever be in my heart, and I cannot wait to read The Toll. Toll won't let me down. I know it won't. I will go back to this footage and make a prat of myself if I'm wrong, but I won't be wrong, because this series is everything. So those were my top 7 books. And yet there were so many that could have gone in this list that was so close to making it that didn't quite get there, because I had to narrow it down somehow. 7 books on a top list of the year. That's amazing. And